What's going on, guys? It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. This will be going over my Week 14 trade targets. It'll be a bit of a different video here. I'm just going to sort of go over three players that I think are sort of trending up and guys that I'm really excited about for the playoffs, guys that I'd be looking to target, and then three guys that I'm sort of on the flip side of that. I know a lot of you guys are past your trade deadlines already, so me giving a ton of trade advice isn't necessarily the most useful thing for you. So then after that, I'm going to spend some time going over either players that I think could really position themselves to be league winners this season. Those are going to be guys that obviously you guys should be super excited about having in your roster. If you're going to play DFS or anything, they should be quality plays as well. And then I'll go over some studs as well that I'm actually really concerned about and guys that I think that you might not be able to really rely on once we get into these fantasy playoffs, because it's just a lot of concerning signs for these guys, troubling matchups or really positive matchups. Really important to pay attention to those matchups and make sure we're optimizing our lineups over these next 3 weeks. We've got just this week, then we've got 3 weeks of fantasy playoffs, and you've got to be super confident and locked in for each of those 3 weeks because you can't afford any sort of gooses or anything like that. You got to make sure you're getting the best roster you can out there. So I'll apologize again. Still got a bit of a stuffy nose, so my voice might sound a little bit weird. So I do apologize for that, but we're powering through. It's not a big deal outside of that. So yeah, I really appreciate all you guys watching these videos. Hopefully you guys are finding them useful. And then of course, if you guys have any start sit questions, waiver questions, trade questions, just let me know in the comments. I'm happy to give you guys my opinions on everything. Want to help make sure you guys get your lineups all set for this week, get you guys into the playoffs, and hopefully help you guys get some championships. So should be a lot of fun. And yeah, let's just get into the first player here. So, to start things off, I couldn't make a video like this without talking about DeAndre Swift again. I know he had a really brutal game this last week against the San Francisco 49ers. I honestly that was a little bit to be expected. I talked about a couple weeks ago how you could go trading for him before these last 2 weeks because you could sell the manager that had him on the fact that their schedule over the next 2 weeks was going to be really brutal. Obviously, a really tough matchup last week against the Niners. He's got another tough one this week against the Dallas Cowboys, but it means he's likely not going to cost you all that much if you can still make a trade for him. And his playoff schedule is just going to be absolutely beautiful. He gets the Seahawks, the Giants, and the Cardinals. That's going to be just absolutely fantastic. I think he's got a legitimate shot to rattle off 3 straight monster performances and could legitimately be a league-winning type of asset. So if you don't have DeAndre Swift, hopefully you do. I know I talked about him several times so far this season, but if you don't have him, I still think he's a guy that can really be a league winner for you guys. I don't think he's ever going to be cheaper than what he is right now. So if he's still available, if you still have a trade deadline that hasn't passed, maybe your trade deadline's the end of maybe your trade deadline's the end of the regular season. I've seen some leagues that do that. I think making one last trade this season to get DeAndre Swift on your roster could be the last thing you need to do here. Next, we got a player that I think I'd be looking to trade away, or just wouldn't. I'm not exactly super confident in going forward, despite actually having a really good game in Week 13. That's going to be James Conner. I talked about him as a sell high last week, and I did mention that he had a decent schedule or a decent matchup in Week 13, and that came to fruition. He had a really great game against the Steelers, looked fantastic. The Cardinals won that game, actually sort of dominating the game script, and James Conner ended up with like 25 carries for 105 yards and 2 touchdowns. The issue, though, is the usage is still a little bit concerning. We got a little bit lucky from his usage standpoint because we saw Amari DeMarcado leave the game with an injury, but we're still seeing a lot of usage out of Michael Carter. The injury to DeMarcado is just a concussion, not to downplay concussions by any means, but it doesn't necessarily mean that after their bye in Week 14 he will be unavailable. So I'd assume the Cardinals are going to have all 3 of their running backs healthy for Week 15, and a matchup against the 49ers, they're not going to be a competitive team in that game. We know how elite the Niners are. There's no way I'm going to feel confident playing James Conner in a Week 15 matchup. We know that there's a likely output for him where he goes out there and puts up 10 carries for 42 yards and catches no passes, and you're just super upset with his output. So obviously the floor is super low for that game as well as the Philadelphia Eagles game in the fantasy playoffs. You obviously can't use him this week. I think he's going to be a solid start in Week 16. You can play him against the Bears, obviously, but you got to get there. I don't think he's going to be a player that's going to help you do that, and he's not going to help you win your championship either. So I have no problem moving off of him. Obviously, your trade deadline maybe have passed already, but if it hasn't, I think moving off of James Conner makes a lot of sense right now. Next, we got a player that I've always been super excited about, and I think he's just trending up even more. He's been dominating the target share and the yardage standpoint, and that's going to be Chris Olave. He's just really sort of finally starting to break out, coming off of like 3 straight really good games, even leaving the game early just 2 weeks ago with a concussion, basically finishing just the game with over 100 yards after only playing 1.5. Finished this last game with 120 receiving yards as well, looked fantastic, and this Saints defense has actually just not been playing nearly as well as it was early on in the season. I think there's going to be an opportunity here where the Saints really do need to put up more points. And on top of that, Derek Carr got banged up, and I believe we're finally going to see a Jameis Winston start. Obviously, we do hope Derek Carr is healthy and okay, but from a fantasy standpoint, I think that the weapons in New Orleans are actually just better off with Jameis Winston. We know that Jameis Winston is really great at accumulating those stats. He's a guy that's going to sling the ball downfield. That's really great for a guy like Chris Olave. And on top of that, he's got really plus matchups going forward. He's got Carolina, which on paper is a bad matchup for opposing wide receivers, but we saw what Mike Evans did last week. They're not a good secondary. It's just that teams can run on them so effectively that they don't necessarily need to rely on that passing game. But I think Chris Olave is certainly going to get his. Michael Thomas is still out on IR. Rashid Shaheed's questionable again this week. We may or may not see Shaheed this week, but Chris Olave is going to see a massive target share. He'll get targeted downfield. This is an offense that's going to put up some points going forward. They're still in the playoff hunt. Their schedule: Carolina, the Giants, the Rams, and the Buccaneers. That's 4 straight really great games, and especially that Week 17 matchup against the Buccaneers. I think he's got a legitimate shot to put up some league-winning performances in that week. So I think he could easily be a league winner on top of that Week 15 against the Giants. That's one of the best matchups out there as well. He could easily get you through round 1 and then seal the deal for you in the playoffs in Week 17. So if you don't have Chris Olave, I know a lot of you guys probably do because I've talked about him so much this season, but if you don't have him, I really think that just explosive playoff push is coming. He's someone that I'm super excited to have on a lot of my rosters here. Next week, we got a player that I'm a little bit less excited to have on my rosters right now. That's going to be Calvin Ridley. And I don't know what you can really get for him at this point, but I just really don't think you're going to advance into the playoffs with him in your lineup. I know that he obviously is coming off of a down performance in Week 13, where we needed to have several big plays called back. He had a big play called back, like a 42-yard reception get called back due to a pretty tic-tacky holding call. Got tackled to the 1-yard line as well. So obviously could have had a much bigger game. But the next 2 matchups, they play Cleveland and Baltimore. So I don't really see there being a situation where those matchups in conjunction with Trevor Lawrence being out with a high ankle sprain. They haven't officially ruled Trevor Lawrence out for this week, but high ankle sprain is normally a couple week injury. It looked bad. He had to get walked back into the locker room right away. For whatever reason, they didn't have a cart for him, so that's a pretty bad look. But the fact of the matter is, you're going to be dealing with a certainly less potent offense in Jacksonville going forward. Those 2 matchups are absolutely brutal, and there's no way that I'm going to feel confident putting Calvin Ridley into a playoff roster in my starting lineup in Week 15 against Baltimore. I bet Jacksonville, especially without Trevor Lawrence there, is just going to get shellacked in that game. They're not going to be able to move the ball very effectively. And unless you have such a stacked roster that you can just sort of hold on to Calvin Ridley, confidently bench him, and have plenty of players to fill holes with. I think that if you need a starter in place of Calvin Ridley, or you have to play Calvin Ridley, it's not something that I'd be super excited about. I'd be looking to move him to someone that I'm more comfortable in, just because I don't think you can start him in this week or in Week 15 and confidently make it through your playoff rounds. So I'd be super concerned. If you have a bye, maybe you can hold out, but if you need him to perform for you in Week 15, I don't think he's going to do that for you. And one last player that I'm super excited about going forward, and that's actually going to be TJ Hockenson. And I really do think he could be a league winner this year. And he actually might be more available than normal with Joshua Dobbs coming off of a stinker in Week 12. They obviously had their bye in Week 13, and now Justin Jefferson's going to return in Week 14. So it's pretty easy to sell a narrative that TJ Hawkinson's going to see reduced target share in what was an overperforming offense. But the matchup is mediocre this week against the Raiders, so obviously that's not completely fantastic. They give about 5% less points than average compared to what a normal tight end scores against them. But weeks 15 through 17, absolutely fantastic. They've got the second best matchup for opposing tight ends against Cincinnati. We saw Evan Ingram just put up a monster game against them. Cincinnati's a beautiful matchup to have if you're a fantasy tight end. Detroit gives up a lot of points to the tight end position, as does Green Bay. So all 3 of those playoff weeks are going to be really plus matchups for TJ Hockenson. I think he could easily be a guy that can honestly put up some massive numbers for you guys and get you guys some wins. So Hockenson, I really do think could be the tight end 1 the rest of the season, and I think he actually is going to come relatively cheap. Last week there was a guy who was in a must-win situation. I traded Trey McBride to him for TJ Hockenson. Obviously with Hockenson being on bye, it didn't work out for him with McBride having such a great game, but I think that's the kind of trade you can pull off. Obviously Hockenson's not unbiased. He's going to be a little bit more expensive than he was before last week, but I think he's certainly a guy that could be a league-winning asset, and I don't think he's all that expensive right now. And the last specific player that I'll dive deep on here is going to be Travis Kelce. And he's someone that I'm really just not super optimistic about going forward the rest of the season. I might be wrong here, but just watching the games, watching Travis Kelce play, I really do think Travis Kelce started just to look a little bit old. He doesn't have the same explosiveness. Going into this last week, he'd only broken 2 tackles on the season. Obviously, that's a huge concern. He just doesn't look like he's the same dominant Travis Kelce that he's been throughout his entire career. Obviously, he's still an elite player, a guy that really understands defenses and is a great comfort and safety blanket for Patrick Mahomes, but he's not the dominant tight end that he really has been. We're not seeing those week winning performances out of him. And even though the championship matchup for him in week 17 against Cincinnati is absolutely fantastic, he's got a matchup in week 15 against New England that's absolutely awful. This Chiefs defense is playing really well. There's no way New England's going to put up enough points to make the Chiefs really throw the ball that much. You're probably going to see a ton of Isaiah Pacheco in that one. So I'm really worried that we could see a situation where Travis Kelce just kind of sinks a lot of people in week 15. I don't think he's going to be a guy that's going to put up a monster performance. You're probably hoping for 4 for 40 and a touchdown in that week just to sort of get you by. But if you could trade Travis Kelce for TJ Hockenson plus, which I definitely think you can, people will happily give you that offer. I would definitely consider doing that because I think Travis Kelce is just not going to be that tight end one the rest of the way, and I'm worried that up until championship week he's going to be a bit of a dead weight for you. So even though he's still a great player, still probably a top 3 tight end the rest of the season, just not a guy that I'm super confident in. It's like being the cornerstone of my roster at this point going forward. And then last, not quite last, but I just wanted to go over some potential league winners, guys that have really dominant schedules that I haven't really talked about in depth yet. So I'll talk about Bijan Robinson. He's got a great matchups or set of matchups against Carolina, Indianapolis, and Chicago. Those are 3 straight fantastic matchups for Bijan, who's being involved quite a bit more. He's clearly the workhorse running back. Not quite getting workhorse usage because Tyler Algier still gets sprinkled in, but he's clearly an elite player. Those are 3 straight really good matchups. I think Bijan Robinson's got a shot to really dominate the playoff stretch and really be a potential league winning asset for people. Najee Harris have to have the question mark there just because Najee Harris is a bit of a question mark himself. But the Steelers, they are obviously going to have to lean on the run game with Kenny Pickett going down. We're going to see a lot of probably short yardage throws, maybe potentially more passing game involvement for the running backs. On top of that, this schedule is really fantastic for the running backs in Pittsburgh. Indianapolis, Cincinnati, and Seattle are all plus matchups. You could put Jalen Warren on here as well, but I think both of them could be like low-end running back twos. Najee Harris is the guy that I'd expect to get that touchdown equity, so I think you could see Najee Harris potentially be like a top 15 running back the rest of the way, so maybe that doesn't necessarily constitute as a league winner, but I do expect him to outperform what he's done so far over the next 3 weeks. DK Metcalf has 3 straight really fantastic matchups. The same could be said, obviously, for Tyler Lockett and JSN, but it's sort of getting a little bit murky in terms of who the clear wide receiver 2 is in Seattle. But DK Metcalf gets matchups against Philadelphia, Tennessee, and Pittsburgh. Those 3 matchups that I'm super excited about, especially the Philly and Tennessee matchups. I think DK Metcalf's got a shot to obviously put up some league-winning performances. Probably not quite going to match what he did in Week 13 with the 3 touchdowns, but I think he could easily be a guy that's going to be just a really big contributor for you guys and potentially finally get you guys that value on like the second round draft capital that you had to spend to get him. Cortland Sutton, I want to bring him up as well. His 3 matchups for the playoffs, as well as his matchup in Week 14, are really fantastic. They play the Chargers this week, then they get Detroit, New England, and the Chargers again in Week 17. The Chargers specifically are a really elite set of matchups for the Broncos. Both pass catchers, and Sutton and Judy are great, but obviously Sutton's the clear wide receiver 1 in Denver. Detroit's a really great matchup as well, and New England's not the worst matchup for opposing wide receivers. So I think that Cortland Sutton could easily put up some big games. We saw him actually catch a big deep touchdown earlier this last week, dropped a potential like 50-yard catch as well. Could have had a much bigger game. So I think Cortland Sutton's a guy that could easily be like a top 15 wide receiver, honestly, for this 4-game stretch here. And he's obviously not going to cost you that right now. So I think he could be a potential league-winning guy right now. And then finally, I just wanted to go over some studs that I'm kind of concerned about in terms of their playoff schedule. So I'll start things off with Jalen Waddle. He's got matchups against the Jets, Cowboys, and Ravens. Those are 3 straight really brutal matchups for wide receivers. I couldn't bring myself to put Tyreek Hill on this list because he's Tyreek Hill. He's the guy that they're manufacturing touches for. He's the first read in pretty much every single passing play. So he's going to get his, but normally when this offense struggles, it comes at the expense of Jalen Waddle. And I think we could see this Dolphins offense struggle against these really good defenses. They haven't really proven to me or the NFL yet that they can perform at a high level against competent defenses. As much as it hurt me to bring them up, I want to bring up David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. Their playoff schedule is kind of brutal. Week 14 is totally fine. They play the Denver Broncos, who, although they've been better lately, really just aren't all that great against opposing running backs. So obviously, I still expect good things for them in Week 14 or in Week 15. But Week 16 and 17, they get Minnesota, who are surprisingly good against opposing running backs, and then Dallas in Week 17. So I think we could see a situation where we see some reduced usage, reduced production out of these 2 running backs. Both are still like running back 2s for me over this playoff stretch, but I don't think I'd expect like top 10 numbers out of either one of them. Joe Mixon, really tough matchups in the playoffs as well against Minnesota, Pittsburgh, and Kansas City. On top of that, Jake Browning obviously played fantastic in Week 13, but it's just tough to like bank on that happening on a regular basis. I think this offense is going to struggle. Joe Mixon's probably not going to be a top 10 running back the rest of the way. He's probably more of like a fringe top 20 guy. Then Saquon Barkley gets New Orleans, Philadelphia, and the Rams. 3 straight negative matchups for the running back position. On top of that, he's the only competent piece this offense has. Maybe Tommy DeVito continues to perform well after the bye. There are rumors that we could get Darren Waller back even as soon as this week. So there is some optimism there for Saquon, but those matchups really brutal. Them being able just to stack the box against him, I'm not excited for him in the league that I do have him in. I don't really think he's going to be a guy that I can really count on to carry me through the playoffs there. So that'll do it for this week's final trade video of the season. Obviously, it's been a super fun season making all these trades, and obviously, hopefully, there's still going to be plenty of things for you guys to do over the next several weeks with waivers in terms of roster optimization. But very few leagues have trades happening into the playoffs, so I'll probably be stopping the trade video series. I'll probably get into some more deep dives in terms of what I expect from the matchups, because obviously our start-sit decisions get even more and more important over the next several weeks. So up next, however, I'll be doing the Thursday Night Football primer. I'll preview the really disgusting game between the New England Patriots and the Pittsburgh Steelers, because the NFL loves us. They love putting these crappy primetime games on Thursday Night Football because they know we're probably going to watch them anyway. So I guess that's on us for watching them, but should be at least some fantasy relevant players in that game, so obviously I have to talk you guys through that. And then Saturday morning I'll get you guys the start sit video where I'll go over every single matchup. And then Sunday morning we'll get the live stream going. I'll get you guys all set for setting your lineups, getting up to date with the injuries, and making sure we get you guys that last win you need to get into the playoffs. So then next week, like I said, I'll mix it up. I'll probably have like 2 or 3 start sit videos, so I'll go a little bit more in depth in terms of specific matchups, answer potential mailbag questions as well on air, just to sort of get you guys more and more in tune in terms of how we could be setting our lineups, because like I said, there's not going to be as much tuning your rosters. Obviously, with no more trades really happening after this week, all we can do is just make sure we put our best lineup that we have out there. So if you want to make sure you don't miss any of those videos, just make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Need about 30 more subscribers to hit the goal of 1,000. I really think we can get there. So help me, help you. Just subscribe to the channel. Make sure you don't miss anything. It'll be super cool to hit that milestone. We've been really hunting that down for a long time. So I really appreciate you all you guys. It's been a super fun ride this season. Let's close it out strong. Let's get you guys in the playoffs and get you guys some championships. So appreciate you guys, and I'll talk to you next time. Peace. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.